All right, everyone. So welcome back to Veterans for Cannabis. I'm Jared Campbell, and joining me as always is my brother, Big C. Carlos, how you doing, brother?
Peachy, brother. Every day's a good day. We're doing.
Same here, my brother. It's always good. It's always good to be back. All right. So over the past two episodes, we built the foundation of this entire discussion. In part one, we examined the Supreme Court's ruling and why it has become one of the most important cannabis-related Second Amendment decisions in recent history. Then in part two, we looked at the ATF Form 4473 and the difficult position many law abiding cannabis users, especially veterans, have found themselves in for years. We explored how federal law and state law often conflict, leaving millions of Americans wondering where they stand. Today, we bring those two conversations together by examining the case that started it all. Who is Ali Danial Hemani? What happened? And why did his case make it all the way to the Supreme Court? And why could the decision shape the future Second Amendment cases for the years to come? We're going to go ahead and now take a closer look. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Carlos. Thanks, brother.
All right. So I think the first question that you ask, and we need to understand who is Ali Hemani. You know who is? He's a Pakistani citizen that was prosecuted for having a weapon and a controlled substance. Right. What else do you have on that? Right there. Who is Ali?
Well, from what I know from my notes is that he lived in Texas and his case did not begin with a violent it did not begin with a violent crime at all, and it definitely did not begin with a robbery or even an assault. And it did not begin because someone claimed he had threatened another person with a firearm. Instead, for what I understand, investigators searched Mr. Hemani's home during an investigation unrelated to firearm violence. And during that search, Mr. Hemani was in full cooperation with investigators. And according to court records, he voluntarily directed agents to marijuana located inside his residence, where agents also recovered a legally owned Glock 9mm pistol, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for some people at first glance, it may sound unusual, but legally, it raised a constitutional question that would eventually reach the country's highest court. Go ahead, Carlos. What do you think, brother?
Mhm. So ultimately, I believe his case was a federal indictment, right? I think that's a statute that criminalized the possession of firearm by individuals who are unlawful users of a controlled substance. So criminalize the possession of firearm by, so like we explained the other day, right? Well, I don't know how it is right now, but prior to this decision, when you buy a firearm, you got to a little box saying whether or not you are a user of a controlled substance or illegal substance, right? So, we all know marijuana was there, right? So ultimately what I see is that the government was going to try to prosecute Ali for having a weapon and being in possession of marijuana, being a user, right? Because you either lie, in the form, or you start smoking and look, it's illegal, right? But the Supreme Court see it differently. You want to talk about that?
Right. And you also brought up some interesting points because during my research, there was absolutely no allegations that was used in a firearm and he used a firearm in connection with any criminal act. So, that was
Yeah.
interesting too. And there was actually no allegations that he possessed a
Yeah.
firearm while under the influence of marijuana either.
Right.
So, right.
Right. But that's the new language, while under the influence, right?
Right.
So that's the new language. Pretty much, it goes down to, right? If you are intoxicated on any controls, narcotic and non-narcotic, include alcohol, they can limit your gun right, especially if there's a history of violence there. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. And I think that was the big distinction in the Supreme Court, was that, that the violent or dangerous behavior has to be in place. While owning a weapon.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
Can I
yeah,
ask maybe an objective question?
go ahead.
Could have him and I been targeted because he was a Pakistani by any chance?
Look, man, this is what I'm not going to go there. Okay.
Right.
Because I'm going. I'm going to look at it as the law being blind, right? So in the end of the day, whether he was Pakistani or whatever, okay, he was breaking the law, and he probably knew that. Okay, but he
Right.
also was cooperating, So, and I'm glad, that there's a lot of things, and I listen to the Supreme Court like daily. Okay, whenever they are in session, not the Supreme Court, the Congress and Senate. And they have acknowledged that there's a lot of old language that needs to be revamped, right? For example, I think this was one of the positions for the Supreme Court oh my God, I just get a blank on the Supreme Court case that were studying if you were born in America, you become a citizen, right? And I think one of the big things that we look at it, okay, was the language and the tradition, right? So in Congress, the laws are so broad, that they can, and this is what I believe Kavanaugh wrote to Congress. I'm like, look, the law, the way it's written, we got to follow it. And it says if you were born in the country, and this has been the practice forever, right? But they say is that the best way to restrict it, it is if you update the language defining what is birth tourism or whatever they call it, right? So going back to the gun marijuana, I think it goes down to the language as well, right? Because it is so broad, right? I think the Supreme Court seen it like that. Like there has to be a behavior other than using a controlled substance to take away your gun. There has to be a negative behavior, some kind of assault, branding with a weapon. If you don't show no danger to society, they don't see a reason why a occasional user per se or medical users cannot own a weapon. Does it make sense?
Right. Right. No, it makes sense.
And
It makes sense.
again, I think it is the language because the Constitution itself is very broad, right? And when you study, for example, the Federalist Papers, right, which ultimately it's not the Constitution, but it was an influence to the Constitution. It's a big part of the country, right? We had
Right.
to acknowledge that this country has Christians roots, let's say like that, Christian roots. Yet we have a First Amendment that pretty much gives the individuals the opportunity to believe what they want to believe. You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
on multiple time, or even in your dollar, it says in God we trust, right? So it is so broad. It's sometimes really hard to come down to a narrow conclusion because things are so broad. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway, and that's what I saw, the Supreme Court pretty much doing is narrowing the reason to get you, to take your guns away. Narrowing to like an actual behavior, not just the fact that you smoke weed. And I appreciate that, because it's like saying because I'm a minority, I need to get pulled over. It's kind of like saying that, because I'm a stoner in my own time, that means I'm a criminal. Come on, man. Like that's not cool.
They're just stereotypes. They're just
Yeah,
stereotypes. That's all it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I found something very interesting. Okay, and let me see. Did I miss anything?
But I wanted to mention real quick that what the federal prosecutors charged Mr. Him and
Uh,
I. They charged him under the 18th U.S. Code 922 G3 federal statute that prohibits an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance from possessing a firearm. So that's the charges they brought against Mr. Him and I.
right, right.
Right.
So the district court granting the motion, agreeing that the government could not prosecute him under the law for mere habitat drug use without a direct connection to a firearm misuse. Again, behavior. The Supreme Court said the same thing. Status praised prohibition criminalizing possession due to drug use. Conduct based on prohibition criminalizing possession while actively using or under the influence of a controlled substance. So the court ultimately ruled that the extending firearm prohibition to anyone based solely on habitual drug use violates the Second Amendment because it prohibits possession by an individual who are otherwise capable of safely owning a gun without regard to any immediate threat or connection to drug use. Does it make
Interesting.
sense?
Yeah, it makes sense because here was here was the argument by him and I's attorneys. They argued that the government has stripped a citizen of a constitutional right based solely on his status as a marijuana user, without
Mhm.
proving that he was dangerous or that history supported such a restriction under the Second Amendment. That was their argument. So, yeah,
And based on the Supreme Court decision, United States versus Hemi 2026, held that it's unconstitutional under the Second Amendment to disarm an individual solely because of regular marijuana use, absence evidence of intoxication, dangerous conduct, addiction, or other individual risk factor. Although Jimenez's case arose in Texas where cannabis remained illegal, the ruling has implications for both federal and state cannabis firearm laws, including states that continue to criminalize cannabis use. What do you think about that?
that's crazy. Holy smokes.
I mean, that's again, I think they narrow another reason. I'm talking about guns. I'm talking in a personal person, right? Because time has changed and we gotta understand the language of the Constitution. I'm not gonna say it needs to change, but we gotta understand that we're talking about a 250-year-old Constitution, right? We have to understand that we shall now infringe citizens from owning firearms. However, we also got the responsibility to protect citizens from bad actors. How do we do that? Right? Do we agree there so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we protect firearms from getting into bad actors? That's always a good question for me, right? I'm gonna tell you what I believe. I believe a centralized federal database where all the states put their individual database of individual conviction or whatever. So let's say I go to Chicago and I'm a convict, in theory, Chicago would not have my conviction from Wisconsin, so I can buy a firearm in another state because the background check is not centralized. I believe that's one. Two, so I do believe in a centralized, federal database, right? I don't like the red laws. Anyways, I think they
Well,
gotta
though,
be. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, those red flag laws that you're talking about can become
Yeah, I
extremely
think they're
dangerous.
stupid.
I live in Oregon,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they can get used. They can be abused.
yeah, yeah. And that's what I'm saying. I disagree with that. I do agree with a age. I say, and this is me, my brain going right. If a male's brain is not fully developed until the age of 25, why are we selling firearms to people whose brain is not developed? You see what I'm saying? There got to be an age, a reasonable age and mandate. And I think buying a weapon at 18 is stupid. What do you think? 25. Okay. My question is why are we selling weapons to people that brains is not developed? If you notice some of the last few cases of political violence, there are kids under the age of what we want to say 23. They were 18 and 19-year-old kids, I believe.
We also send people to war that are under 25. What is
Yeah,
war?
I mean, that right there could be a clear exception. That I personally believe, like, same thing with alcohol, right? I don't think, and I'm actually agree with Germany on this. Drinking and smoking should be 21. So I disagree with Germany because Germany, they let people drink at 16, but to smoke, you gotta be 21. My point is this, right? The argument with firearms is so tricky. And I believe, we have to come to a happy medium, you know, in which, law abiding citizens, right, can own firearms legally, because who knows what will happen, them government, try to take our taxes again. We might need to, right? But we also got to recognize that we have a lot of bad actors, right? And after COVID, this and I'm gonna say after COVID, I think COVID, the seclusion in COVID affected a lot of people negatively, especially those people in high school and middle school. Those are the one we see freaking doing all this crazy stuff, sadly. And this is just look at it, look at generation. COVID destroyed people. Okay, not only physically but mentally. And right now we got the highest level of anxiety, in kids. I think pretty much it comes down to don't be stupid, and if you're doing something stupid is gonna get done to you. For example, if you're trafficking or distribute or selling drugs and you have a gun, you have a high risk of getting shot and take the gun away for the rest of your life, right? Don't be stupid. Dangerous conduct related to firearms. Look, again, if you're a dumbass, you're going to get gun taken away, okay? Handling firearm while intoxicated. Be careful where you do it. That's what I'm going to say about that, okay? And we understand there are going to be challenges to these Supreme Court cases, right? Yeah. And I think some of the challenge was gonna be, like I said, having a federal statute, a federal, you know, how how to make it more safer for for good people to buy weapons, right? I don't know if that makes sense to you, but they have to figure something out. We have to come back kind of like in the middle, what works for everybody. What is logical? That's what I'm trying to say. What is a logical remedy to the gun violence? It's not gonna be taking your guns away. Okay, it's holding people responsible when they act stupid. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I guess that's ultimately a constitutional question, right? Many would argue there should be evidence of dangerous contact, right? Maybe violent
Yeah,
behavior or clear public safety risk. But I've seen others believe that Congress can prohibit firearm possession by border categories of people if it believes doing so protects the public safety. The Supreme Court's
yeah,
recent decisions have increasingly emphasized that restrictions must also fit within the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. Into my notes.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's what
And
I
again,
kind of.
I'm a hardcore pro Second Amendment. Everybody in my house got guns and weapons. I am not the person who say, "Oh, take guns away." No, they have to, responsibility. They have to be. We have to be a responsible user.
Well, I
I'm
agree. I
just
mean,
tired. Yeah, it's because, I see all this gun violence. My only question is, how do they get their hands on all these guns? Because they're not legal weapons. They're illegal weapons, either stolen or whatever.
well, many
Right.
people leave
So,
them out. Many people leave them out. You'll be surprised. A lot
yeah,
of people don't lock into a safe, you know?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
how a lot of people get those guns, or they have access to the safe itself, and,
mm,
the flags were missed, the warnings
yeah.
were missed. So, I mean,
Yeah. So I mean, I guess this could be a good ending. With the question is, what's the happy medium? You know, how can we take Supreme Court narrowing of reasons to take your guns away? How can we meet in the middle when it comes to gun laws? I think that's a good question.
absolutely.
And of course, again, I think the Supreme Court was clear. If you're a responsible user, solely for using marijuana, we cannot take your guns away. That's what it says. So yeah, or are we in the happy medium already? That could be it too. But anyways, Jerry, let's think about that question and look at it in the lenses of cannabis use and legality. What could be the happy medium? And I'm gonna put everybody into one category. Hard to do that. I cannot do that. Anyway, let's talk later, man.
All right, man. Peace. Bye, brother.
All right, mate.